We've got a few guest speakers lined up today, and I think it'll be a really, really interesting session. So we'll kick it off with Sara. She's currently studying out of UC, and she's going to speak to us on the menstrual cycle and its effects on performance.
Perfect. Thank you, Esperance. Let me figure out now how to share my screen.
Yeah, not a problem.
This is always fun. You guys can let me know what you see right now. Let me see. Can you see that right now?
Yes, I can. Yep.
Okay, so you can see the big screen. And thank you, Esperance. My name is Sara, and I am a sports dietitian by trade, but I am a PhD candidate at the University of Canberra Research Institute for Sport and Exercise. And to be more precise, my research is about the menstrual cycle and menstrual cycle symptoms and nutrition strategies for managing them. But today, as Esperance mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the menstrual cycle and how it affects training performance, and a little bit touching on injury risk as well. So to begin with, I thought I start by recapping a little bit on the menstrual cycle. So we have all a broad understanding of what it is and what we're looking at. Sometimes it can get very confusing. So let's recap it a little bit. And in front of you is a menstrual cycle. And the first and foremost thing that we have to keep in mind is that a normal or regular, like normal in a little bit in bunnies, but a regular menstrual cycle is anything in between 21 to 35 days. But if you look at the real world scenario, it could vary a lot from person to person and even within one person from cycle to cycle. So there is no such thing as a normal menstrual cycle, but the definition for regular is that one. So a cycle that lasts between 21 to 35 days. And we usually break it up into two main phases. So the first one being the follicular phase that you can see here, and the second one being the luteal phase. But more broadly, you can think about them as the low hormone phase and the high hormone phase. Now, you could even break this up a little bit further and in more precise way, where we actually have four main phases of the cycle, starting with day zero. So right at the beginning with the early follicular phase, that's where menstruation happens. Then we move into the rest of the follicular phase. This is our phase two. Moving on to ovulation, which is actually quite short and is our phase three. It could last anything between 12 to 24 hours, so very short. And finally, we end up with the luteal phase, which is our phase four. And across these phases, we see very distinct hormonal changes that basically are driven by two main hormones. Estrogen, which you can see here in the blue. I hope you can see that well. And progesterone, which you can see here in the orange. And these two hormones, they play a central role in many of the physical and psychological changes that matter most to female athletes. So they are quite important. And most of the time, of particular importance is what happens during hormone peaks. So, for example, here and here, and during hormonal withdrawal, for example, here, and when we enter menstruation in this part. And this is because those points are often when we notice significant effects on performance, recovery, and basically general well-being on athletes. If we shift a little bit of gears and we talked about hormonal contraceptive use, in athletes, it's actually quite common, and we're estimating that is about 50% of different hormonal contraceptives. So the reason why an athlete might choose to use hormonal contraceptives is very variable. Some use it for pregnancy prevention, others for regulating or manipulating their cycle, and others to manage symptoms even. And the most widely used form of hormonal contraceptives is the oral contraceptive pill or the mini pill as well. But they all vary in composition and hormonal effects. So there is a big range of them that you can get in the market, basically, depending on your needs. And also athletes use long-active reversible contraceptives, like, for example, the IUD, which is becoming quite popular. and also implants, transdermal patches, and vaginal rings. Um, but when it comes to performance and hormonal contraceptive use, and narrowing into the studies, most studies suggest that hormonal contraceptive use has either a neutral or a slightly negative effect of their use on performance. But it's very important that we keep in mind that these effects tend to be very small and highly individual, so they change between person to person. So there is no universal recommendation to either avoid or use hormonal contraceptives purely for performance reasons at this point in time. So yeah, it's popular, but definitely don't think about using it or not using it in terms of performance because we don't have enough information um, to provide a recommendation based on that. So something quite similar actually happens with those athletes that do not use hormonal contraceptives and therefore are naturally cycling. Um, because scientific evidence related to the effect of the menstrual cycle on measurable performance, and this is the performance that you can measure through things like VO2 max, like a testing, speed trial testing, jumping testing, and stuff like that. So the the research around that area is very confounding, and there are currently no universal recommendations for adjusting your training based on the menstrual cycle to improve different aspects of performance per se. And a big part of the reason we don't have more clarity in this area is honestly because research on the menstrual cycle and female-specific physiology is still catching up. There is a lot of work to do, and it's only in recent years that we have started to really focus on this. So, with that said, each phase of the menstrual cycle can influence things like your mood, coordination, recovery, and even injury risk, because there is a small evidence on that. So, for example, rising estrogen levels. So, when we start in this blue line, when we start rising here, um, there you go, the rising estrogen levels. Especially close to mid-cycle. So I put like a little egg here for ovulation, so you know that that's the middle. But it's the same chart that I showed later. So it's the follicular and the luteal phase. The middle is ovulation. And when we're getting closer to that mid-cycle, we can see the rise in estrogen levels. And that rise is often linked with improved muscle strength, better endurance, enhanced neuromuscular coordination, which might make feel athletes stronger, more alert, and even recover a little bit faster. But on the flip side, when progesterone levels rise, which is this phase, the luteal phase, with progesterone being the red here, we in this phase, we often see an increase in core body temperature, less efficient thermoregulation, and a mild potential change in metabolism. This varies from people to people, but it could happen. And these shifts can lead to a higher perceived effort, reduced endurance, and even reduced recovery. But again, these effects are usually small, like in the hormonal contraceptive case, and there is still a lot we don't know. Um, but that doesn't mean that the menstrual cycle is not important. So that's not the message here. So even if the measurable performance, which is what I describe, like things that you can measure through testing, like jumping test and VO2 max and stuff like that, even if that doesn't change the way that athletes feel physically and mentally can be actually deeply affected by the menstrual cycle. And I'm actually going to come back to this after the next slide, but keep that in mind that the menstrual cycle it is important regardless. So what about injury risk? So just like with measurable performance, as I was speaking before, the evidence is quite mixed. For example, estrogen peaks around ovulation. So if we go back to this chart again, ovulation in the middle, and with these estrogen rises. Um, those peaks in estrogen are linked to greater ligament laxity, which might increase the risk of injuries because this especially could affect the knee joint, and this is something that has been looked at in the literature. But again, it's a complex picture, and findings are not always very consistent. So some studies have found that there is something, an effect, and some haven't. And that said, there is a recent study that I wanted to highlight here that looked at 25 footballers. So it was a team, and this was over 3 seasons. So it's longitudinal, so quite a long time. And they were tracking 593 cycles, so that's quite a lot. And they found a higher rate of muscle and non-contact injuries during the luteal, and including in the luteal phase, the premenstrual days of the cycle. So the premenstrual days are about 5 days before you start bleeding. And particularly these non-contact injuries and muscle injuries were quite predominant in during games rather than training. And there were several potential hypotheses to explain these. For example, the increases in progesterone that happen in the luteal phase of the cycle can mean that there is a higher amino acid turnover, and this has to do with the proteins in the body and the utilization of proteins, metabolism of proteins, which may reduce the muscle ability to repair basically your tissues under stress. Also, hormonal withdrawal might trigger a spike in inflammation, which can make tissues more vulnerable. And hormonal shifts may also influence the biomechanics of your body. So it might affect joint control and movement patterns. There is another factor that is menstrual symptoms. So things like cramps, fatigue, or mood changes could also impact your readiness, your movement quality, and overall performance, or your perceived performance, and therefore increase injury risk. So because we touch on the menstrual symptoms possibility for this to be a reason why injury risk increases in this part of the cycle, I thought I'd lead with that. And we need to understand that regardless of a lack of effect of the menstrual cycle on measurable performance, which includes injury risks to some point, there is a strong consensus on the menstrual cycle effect, which is largely to symptoms on perceived performance. So things that you feel, how you feel. And these symptoms can basically impose a number of challenges and make athletes feel less able or even less willing to train or compete, which happens quite a lot. Because these symptoms are common and experienced by about 80% of athletes, and they usually take place during the days before menstruation, or in that premenstrual phase, and they carry on during menstruation, the first days of bleeding, which is equivalent to withdrawal bleeds for those using hormonal contraceptives. So even if you are not naturally cycling and you're using hormonal contraceptives, you could still experience these symptoms. So around bleeding in general, athletes usually report more pain, fatigue, soreness, muscle stiffness, mood changes, and even decreased motivation and sleep quality. So there you go. That's what I wanted to show. So it's important to consider. But on the other side of things, usually after the first days of bleeding, and sometimes all the way until the middle of the cycle, so ovulation, often athletes could report improved mood, alertness, feeling stronger, increased confidence, which could be very positive. So even though the cycle might not dramatically change your measurable performance, it definitely affects how athletes feel, and that alone can impact how you train, recover, and compete. So it needs to be taken into consideration. So the big question, I guess, here is, should we tailor training around the menstrual cycle, I guess? And the answer is really, it depends. So from a purely physiological standpoint of view, the science does not currently support rigid phase-based training plans. So in that sense, no, we should not all be prescribing training based solely on calendar days of someone's cycle. And these must be considered at the individual level, basically. But from a symptoms-informed, athlete-centered approach, absolutely yes. Because if an athlete experiences symptoms that disrupt their training or performance, then when we tailor based on those patterns, it can be very helpful for the athlete. So the same goes if an individual has identified a pattern of injuries that is linked to a certain part of their cycle. This can be very helpful because we can plan ahead. So the reality is that it might not be the hormones themselves that might limit in little bunnies, I don't know how to call this, limit performance, but rather we should be thinking that it could be how the menstrual cycle and its symptoms impact the athlete's experiences. So how you feel, how you move, how you recover, and how we show up to training and games. That's what might be more important. So in terms of what's the best approach, instead of going for a rigid cycle-based plan, we should aim for a symptom-informed flexible strategy. So in terms of athletes, the top recommendations are that you track your cycles and symptoms, you look for personal patterns and trends, and identify these. You adjust based on how you feel and not just the calendar and whatever phase of the cycle you are, because your cycles could be different 1 month to the next. And when you are ready, talk to your support team, and let your coaches and teammates know how you're feeling so you can work together on solutions. In terms of support stuff, the recommendations are that you recognize that the menstrual cycle and contraceptive use affect athletes very differently. So there is no one size fits all approach. The support staff should be fostering more respectful conversations. And they should be adapting training when symptoms impact performance. So when appropriate, be more flexible when needed and if possible. And the support staff should also support cycle tracking, but without making it mandatory, because this approach could be taken differently by different athletes, and that's completely fine. Everybody needs to have a choice and a decision on how they want to track their menstrual symptoms and their menstrual cycle. So that leads me to the conclusion of the whole thing. So putting it into perspective, it is all about empowered adjustment, really, not strict rules. And for sports like soccer, cycle informed planning can actually help, because tracking and anticipating symptoms could allow athletes and support staff to plan recovery, adapt training loads, and be aware of a lot of things like, for example, injury patterns. And of course, this could help increase lines of communication and openness in this space. And at the end of the day, I guess the main message also is that informed athletes are empowered athletes, and that's everything that we probably should be striving for, at the very least. Yes, some references, and just in case you want them. And yes, any questions?
If anyone has any questions, you're more than welcome to unmute your mic or type it in the chat box as well, and we can go from there. No? Okay, that's all good. Thank you
Less
so much,
pressure for
Sara.
me.
Yes, yeah, that was very insightful. Thank you so much for that. We're going to move on to Georgia now. So she's going to talk to us about balancing the student athlete life. Just get up the presentation for you, Georgia.
Thank you.
Awesome. Can we all see that?
Okay. Mine's a lot less detailed than the last presentation, but I'm going to be talking a bit about time scheduling and managing my commitments, like with school and being an athlete at the same time. So yeah, we could move on to the next slide, please. I'll just tell you a bit about me. I started playing football at age 8. I started at Gungahlin United. I played for about a year just on the field and played a bit in goals, and then decided I wanted to be a full-time goalkeeper, and Mum was like, look, if you're going to be chucking yourself around, you probably need to get taught how to actually do it properly. So I did quite a bit of goalkeeper coaching and learnt how to do the right technique and everything. And then spent about 2 years playing at Gungahlin as full-time goalkeeper before I moved to the academy. I was at the academy for about 4 seasons and progressed through multiple age groups. I've also represented ACT at the National Youth Championships a few years in a row. I've been with Canberra United for 3 seasons now. The first season was just as a train on, and the last two were as the third goalkeeper. I've participated in a few Junior Matildas camps and got to travel overseas and internationally with them, as well as playing in Australia as well. I'm a Year 12 student at Lake G, and yeah, my final year of school. A big thing for me is, as an athlete, is managing a lot of my schoolwork and training loads at the same time. I find if I struggle with one, the other suffers as well. So if I'm stressed with school, I'm not going to be performing at my best at training. So I'm always making sure that I'm on top of my schoolwork and my training load, just so that both can be at the best they can. I have a few strategies that I like to use. I love having calendars on my phone, on my laptop, just so I can have a visual representation of what I need to do that week or that day, just to know what the plan is and what I need to prioritize through the day, whether that's nutrition, sleep, or recovery. School's definitely been a big part of helping me keep everything on track and on top of. There's a elite sports program at school that I'm involved with, and that's really helpful with helping me manage all my load. I often talk to all my teachers about it, and I'm very open with them about what I have planned and what's upcoming and what's busy at that time. So I'm often talking to my sports teachers or just even my normal teachers and just what I have coming up, and that's also a big help with what I've got to do. Having a positive relationship with my teachers has been probably one of the biggest things I can recommend to anyone, because not only just with schoolwork, but having a positive relationship with them can help me focus on other things such as social life and especially school and stuff. I find myself often reaching out to teachers, chatting with them on a daily basis, letting them know if I'm going to be at training on this day or whatever. Just always communicating with what the plan is, so they know what's going on in my life and they know how to accommodate for that. I often pre-plan assessments if I'm planning to travel away with soccer or anything. If I have any trips coming up, I'll often chat to the teachers prior and say, look, I'm not going to be here for a certain amount of time. When's the best time to do this assessment, or can I come in early to do it, just to see whether it can work easier for both of us, or I'm just gonna have to suck it up and do it while I'm away anyway, which sometimes is the case, but hopefully a lot of the time we can get it moved around a little bit. I use each holidays to reach out to my teachers and just plan ahead for the next term upcoming. So especially at the beginning of the year, I'll let all my teachers know what my busiest terms are and just communicate on what I need from them, and then they'll let me know what they need from me when the biggest assessment weeks are, which I find really helpful. So then I can know what's coming up in the upcoming weeks and prioritize whether days and training days that I need to focus on training or days I need to focus on school. And just it makes it a lot easier just knowing what's coming up instead of just it getting sprung on me and realizing, oh, I have an assessment next week that I haven't started yet, but I have training up until then. So I don't know what to do when I can have that 2 weeks prior and already be working on it. I tend to use a lot of my like class time to work on assessments or just classwork. I really try to focus in class. And although that is quite hard being with all my friends, like I do just try to put my head down and figure out the best way to work through all the work that I'm given in class so I don't have to do it at home. Another thing is like using my free periods. I've got quite a bit of spare time at school, which I want to use like wisely and not just use for hanging out with friends, because obviously I can do that outside of school. So making sure that I'm studying in those free periods, and also like while I'm at school having access to the teachers. If I do need help, I can just go and ask. I think that's been a big thing for me, just being able to talk to my teachers about it, like outside of class time. So yeah, I think that's been a big help with my load management. Having a heavy training load can be very difficult, like on your everyday life. I find myself constantly hungry, constantly tired, and I think a lot of people don't know how much sacrifice goes into being like a high level athlete. I miss out on a lot of social events and even like sports and stuff at school where I can't participate because of injury risk or because my training load's so high that week. I think that's a big thing that has been hard to adapt to, is not being able to hang out with my friends because I'm prioritizing my recovery or my sleep, or just being able to relax when I need to and taking days off. I think that's an important thing for me, is knowing when I am at that point of exhaustion that I do need to just take a day off school and relax, but then find the balance between, oh, I'm not just going to take days off school when I need to. Like, there is a point where I will have a rest day and prioritize my rest. But there are days, like most days, I will prioritize recovery and nutrition, which is an everyday thing for me. Yeah, not too much else to say about um anything else on this slide. I think, yeah, this is my last slide, so it's not gonna go as long as the other one, but motivation is probably a hard thing to give advice on. I think as a professional athlete, you kind of get chucked into an environment where you just have to go to training, you have to go to gym, like you don't have a choice. But I think like being in an environment with such high level athletes, you kind of get taught just to like do it anyway. Like even if you're tired, if you're sore, you kind of just are lifted up to do it anyway. And I think that's a big thing that I've taken into doing my schoolwork as well. Like I'll be tired and not want to go to school, but I'll go anyway because that's my mindset with football. So why can't it be my mindset with everything else, you know? So I think that's a big thing for me. Which is hard to kind of explain to everyone else when everyone has a choice in what they do. But yeah, with trainings, I think just doing it anyway when you don't want to definitely makes you a better athlete, because a lot of people have the choice not to do it, and it makes you stand out from the others if you're going to do it. I do a lot of self-reflection in my own time. I'll watch back training videos and games and just really think about like my own performance, and I do that with school as well. I'll get a grade back and I'll reflect on what I could have done better, whether I could have prepared better, spent more time on the assignment. I think self-reflection is a big thing for me, being an athlete as well as a school student, just juggling all that stuff is quite difficult. So having time to reflect helps me improve for the next few assessments or next few games or whatever. And my last point is probably using my friends and teammates as support. I think socializing outside of sport is incredibly important, and having your teammates there as well to help you if you're not having a great day. Like, not every training session is going to be great, so having friends outside of sport to help you through that or just to distract you is, I think, such a big thing for me. I love hanging out with my friends, although it's hard when all of our schedules don't align and it's always so long between when we can hang out and when we can't. But also having like my best friends at training is like my motivation to go. Just to see them every day is also great. So, yeah. But thank you guys for listening, and if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to listen.
Thanks, Georgia. That was great. I think it's really important with the motivational aspect, how professional athletes do really just have that drive to keep going and going, day after day, no matter how they're feeling. Di, did you have something to ask then?
I was just going to ask, well, I was going to say, first of all, well done, Georgia. Good job. But my question was going to be, if you're allowed to say, just whether you have any anything you're going to do post year 12.
I think I'm quite interested in doing like sports media and photography and stuff. So I think after year 12, I'll look into doing some courses with that, but focusing on football, but also having like a backup plan, because obviously I can't just be football, although as much as I want to do that my whole life. But yeah, I think sports like media and photography is kind of the road I want to go down.
So Demi Patterson is with us from ACTAS. She's an advanced sports dietitian, here to talk about the value of fueling yourself and on athlete performance.
Perfect. Thank you all for having me. So today we're going to run through a few different things. So we're going to start off with nutrition to support training, looking at some recovery nutrition, and then how to put some of those things into practice. So when we look at nutrition to support training, the thing that I really like to start with is my nutrition priorities pyramid. So you can see here the thing that is the most important is down the bottom, and that's the amount of energy that we're actually eating. So getting enough food in to support our needs. Then what that is made up of in terms of carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, and the timing of those types of foods. Then from there, we go into different vitamins, minerals for health, and then the sprinkle on top of the icing on top of the cake is supplements, but they don't really have much effect unless we're getting the rest of the pyramid right. So we're going to spend a lot of the time talking about the bottom three aspects of the pyramid tonight. So if we look on how we use our energy to help you understand why it's really important to actually get enough in, we use our energy from food in two ways. So 50 to 70% of the energy that we consume through food is actually just used for our body functions. So hormonal development, immunity, bone health, reproductive health, growth, and recovery. So most of the food energy that we expand is actually just the things that you don't really think about that your body's just doing to keep you thriving. Then depending on your training load, 30 to 50% of the energy that we consume on top of that is then used to support our activity. So we kind of assess this in terms of something that's called energy availability. And that's basically when we look at the amount of food that energy that we consume from food and drink minus the energy that we expend from our daily activity, how much is actually left over for our body to undertake all those important functions it needs to do to not only keep us alive, but to actually keep us thriving and being as well as we can be. And that amount left over is our energy availability. So we essentially want that to be in a positive state. When it's in a negative state, we go into this low power mode, which is something that's referred to as low energy availability, or LEA. So it occurs when there's not enough energy left over for both physical activity and body functions. So if you think about what actually happens, if you have a smartphone and it's going into that low power saving mode to kind of keep your battery on for as long as possible, it shuts down a lot of functions in the background, it dims the screen, it does all these things to conserve and to keep the phone on as long as possible. And that's kind of what our body actually does when it goes into this state of low energy availability. What that looks like is it goes, okay, well, you're still doing the exercise. So we still need to give the energy for that. That's not changing. So we need to save energy in other ways. And it will start at that lowest priority because they're not needed for survival. So what it will do is it will change your hormones. So for females, this can look like a change in menstruation. It might be delayed onset of your first period. It might be not getting your period regularly. It might be stopping getting your period. It might be bleeding for less days, more days, heavier or lighter. It can be reducing or switching off your immune system function. So you might be getting sick more often or take a long time to get better. You can get digestion changes. So you might be getting a lot more gut upset, bloating, abdominal cramping, different changes to your toileting patterns. Our bone health can suffer. So you might be getting more injuries, stress fractures, those type of things, bone bruising. And then it also reduces our cognitive function in terms of thinking and decision making. Sorry. So how that might show up is you might really struggle to make decisions. Mentally, you might find it hard to concentrate. You're really foggy. You might find your mood has changed. So you might find you're not motivated, or you're quite agitated a lot more easily, feeling quite low, those type of things as well. Struggling to concentrate through school or study or work. Then if there's still not enough energy left over, our body then moves up the line in priority. So it'll move to that level 2 priority around restricting how things that, can be compromised to some degree, but will still stay alive. So we might stop growing if you're still in that growth period of your life. It will reduce how your body uses energy during exercise, which, if you're training to improve performance, means that you're not actually going to get those performance outcomes that you're desiring. And you can also have changes to your temperature regulation. It's more likely to go, you'll feel a lot colder than everyone else, because your body is conserving that heat that it would normally use to heat you up. The energy that it would use for that is being placed elsewhere. So if you think of like a dimming light switch, it's essentially turning these functions down. And sometimes it will switch them off altogether, and that's quite common in things like hormones. And then the highest priority are the things that won't be compromised because of survival. So your heart will still be beating, your lungs will still be functioning, so your brain circulation and nerves. However, your brain function will change. It will be in a reduced capacity. So that kind of shows what is happening under the surface when, over a period of time, we're actually consistently not getting enough in. So it's actually quite a big deal. There's a lot happening inside, and you might not see these warning signs for quite a while. Some people might get changes to their menstrual cycle first. Some people, might get sick a lot more first. Some people might not pick up on things until, they're having an injury. So when we look at how this actually occurs, what can happen is we want to be in this green space here in the middle, which is when there's sufficient energy available for life and training. So our energy intake is matched for what our body is requiring for our life processes, and also for what our energy demand is for that training. When we go into low energy availability, we're either not eating enough to support our energy available for life and training load, so we're not consuming enough, or our training load increases. So you might start season, for example, throw in a whole bunch of, or pre-season, throw in a whole bunch of extra training, but you haven't increased your food high enough to match that. And then you end up in that negative mismatch. So that's kind of why that is the thing down the bottom in terms of why it's important enough. Yeah, it shows up for athletes a lot of the time, and it can happen incidentally in terms of you get not understanding how much you need to eat, or increasing training, not increasing food. Some people get a response to training where their appetite can be dampened as well and struggle to get enough in, or just balancing eating with a busy training and life schedule. It can also be on purpose in terms of trying to make body composition changes, change your physique, or, feeling like if you change how you'll eat, then you'll perform better. And then that might end up in you not consuming enough. And how this can actually show up in our training is it means we have decreased cardiac performance. So your endurance capacity actually decreases, your power and strength decrease, your ability to make decisions quickly on the pitch decreases, your reaction times and things like that with that also decrease. You're more likely to be sick or injured and therefore not available to play, and your motivation to turn up and train decreases. So there's this fine line if we're trying to improve our performance, that we can quite easily step into overcooking it and ending in this space of low energy availability and going actually against what we were actually having a good intent and trying to do. So what are some things that we can work on to help us get enough in around training? This is my roadmap to training. And this is aimed at an afternoon session, or, a game a bit later in the day. So our roadmap to training is actually our roadmap to game as well, which is really great. We essentially pick up and put the same thing into game day. Some of the foods you choose might be slightly different, but the concepts are exactly the same. So what that looks like is we want our main meal to be at least 3 to 4 hours before we train, if possible. I know that's not always possible, but the reason we want it there is because when we train, we're using carbohydrates for our energy source. And in our main meals, we have often great sources of carbs, but we also have all the other things that we need for our health in terms of protein, fats, fiber, and they're really great for our health and well-being, and that we really need them. However, they slow down the digestion of the carbohydrate. So if we have a mix of all of those foods a lot closer to training, that food actually isn't going to be digested in time, and that carbohydrate isn't going to be available for us to use. And then when we are exercising, the blood moves from our stomach to our limbs to support our movement. So that digestion process slows down as well. And that's when you can get a lot of gut upset or just feeling really, not great in your digestion. Then as we get closer to training, depending on what time, what your day looks like, what your energy levels look like, how you go eating closer to training, we have a top-up substantial carb snack. So this might still have a bit of fat or a bit of protein in terms of yogurt or peanut butter or, things like that, but it's a predominantly simple carbohydrate meal. So you can see the carbohydrate snack, sorry. So you can see the examples there are things like muesli bars, white bread sandwiches, cereal, yogurt and fruit. And then the closer we get to training, the more simple and refined and purely, that should say high GI, not low GI, purely high GI simple carb snacks. So these are the white carbs that are really fast in how they're digested. They're in our bloodstream within 15 minutes, ready for us to use when we're, in training. They're also those things that just before you step onto the pitch for a game or having, during a game, for example, they're the things that you want to be choosing. So it's good to have them around training so that you have, really strong confidence in how your gut actually uses those, and they're going to work well for you. So those things are more like rice crackers, pretzels, fruit, dried fruit, sports drink, juice, lollies, fruit sticks, apricot delights, those type of things, toast, fruit toast, hot cross buns, just those really quickly digested carbohydrate only foods. And that's how we look at supporting, that training. So for afternoon training, that kind of last top-up snack, there's some other examples there that I didn't mention before, like popcorn, breakfast biscuits, oat-based muesli bars, or like fruit-filled bars like ketone bars, fruit purees, pikelets. There's so much there to play around with. The best tip I can have is to have emergency snacks pre-training, because days change. And if you packed it for, school, for example, or work, and you've had a hungry day, or, whatever, you have it early, or you just forget something, then you've got a backup in your training bag or in the car. And a lot of those options there are shelf stable. So you could put a box of muesli bars in the car or in your bag. Or my athletes are really obsessed with fruit sticks at Actaz at the moment. So they travel really well as well. So being responsible and thinking ahead. And then, if it's the same bag for games, it's already there for you too. Then if we look at what actually happens during training, if it's less than an hour, we don't have a need for carbohydrate. And if it's longer than an hour, we want to start to use carbohydrate again, so that our body gets really used to that for when we play, but also so that we're not dipping into that low energy availability space. So we look at starting small with that. It might be liquid-based, like sports drink, like Powerade, for example, or juice. Or it could be, during a training break between drills or something, having some crackers, dried fruit, apricot delights or lollies or things like that tend to be quite popular. And then no matter what type of training, we always want to have our water or our fluid in some form, no matter what the length is. And like I've kind of been feeding through, apologies, my 4-year-old is clearly not happy with bedtime, if you can hear that in the background. But we wanted to train the way that we play. So our gut actually functions like a muscle in terms of we can train it to utilize the carbohydrate more effectively, reduce gut upsets, and it also means that you're comfortable. I've seen some people throw in some foods they've never had before and step onto a pitch, and that can be really disastrous in terms of, you know, having allergic reactions, throwing up, like all these unpleasant things that you don't want to have when you're just looking at playing. So hopefully that gives you some clarity around why it's really important to focus on actually eating enough, and then what we need during training and just before training. So then I thought we'd also then move on to cover what happens then after we train. So when it comes to recovery nutrition, we have 4 R's of recovery nutrition that we like to focus on. So I've clearly harped on about carbohydrate a lot already this evening. So we need to refuel with carbohydrate. Yeah, we've burnt up a lot of our stores to keep us in that, you know, positive energy availability state. We need to replace what we've burnt, and it's the preferred fuel for our brain to function as well as our muscles. We want to match that with the training needs for the day. So if it's a day that we have more on or more intensity in our training, then we want to have more carbohydrate because our needs will be higher in that day. And that will just help you, again, avoid dipping into that low power mode. And then, like we've kind of focused on earlier, when we undereat our carbs, it leads to fatigue, delayed recovery, poor performance, poor concentration, and really puts you in that risk of developing that low energy availability space. We then want to move on to repairing with protein. So protein is important for the growth and development, increase and maintenance of muscle mass. It supports muscle repair and recovery. The aim is to have around 20 to 25 grams 4 to 6 times over a day. And the thing that I really like about dairy before bed is that if you have a cow's based or an animal-based dairy product, it has a special protein in there called casein, which is slowly released. And that just helps boost that repair of the protein to be working harder overnight. So the other thing about the dairy is that it's also got calcium and other things like females can be quite lacking in. So getting some dairy in the form might be like yogurt, smoothies, cereal with milk, custard, rice puddings. It's starting to get colder, so hot chockies or chocolate milk. I'm a really big fan of Milo and milk as well, because again, Milo has added iron and calcium, which females can, you know, be at a high risk of going low in terms of nutrients. So getting some form of dairy before bed, if you do consume cow's dairy, then that is going to be a great option. If you don't consume cow's milk, that's okay. There's plenty of other ways you can meet your protein needs, but the dairy alternatives are just not going to have the casein in them, which is completely fine. But it's just one of those things to think about when you are mapping out if you do have cow's dairy. So what does 20 grams of protein actually look like? So it's around palm size of beef, chicken, lamb, pork, a tin of salmon or tuna, 200 grams of tofu or protein. Deli meat is quite a large portion, so it's around 250 grams to get 20 grams of protein. 3 to 4 eggs, 1 high protein yogurt, or 2 lower protein yogurts, 550 mils of plain or flavored milk, a serving of protein powder, an up and go high protein energize, or 2 regular up and goes. And then there's quite high your vegetarian sources in terms of cottage cheese, chickpeas, nuts, hummus. You can see that it's just quite a larger portion in terms of volume of food that you do have to get in, but you can still meet it with those foods as well. We then move on to rehydrating with fluid. So our fluid maintains our blood volume, regulates our body temp, and allows our muscles to contract effectively. And also avoiding being dehydrated helps with not only those physical things, but our mental capacity as well, in terms of decision-making, reaction time. Actually all comes down to our hydration status as well. And we don't just look at water, if it's hot, for example, so particularly for Canberra summer, looking at potentially having some electrolytes, particularly if you are a heavy sweater, or training more in the warmer part of the day, or struggle to drink regularly, that can help your body actually maintain the fluid that you are drinking as well. And then we look at our last R for our recovery nutrition is revitalize. And this is focusing on our micronutrients. So the more items that we need more for our just general health and well-being from food. So vitamins, minerals, and fiber. So we're looking at calcium to help support our bone health, iron to help support our energy levels and oxygen transportation throughout the body, and healthy fats to help support our heart health. And then a range of fruits and veg and high fiber carbohydrates to help support our gut health, immune function, and general well-being. Also, the fruit and vegetables reduce the inflammation that is caused by exercise as well. So how this actually presents after a session, it might feel like you've got a lot to think about getting in, but if you break it down, it's really just getting some carbs, some proteins, some veg, salad, fruit or fiber, and some fluid. So it can be tricky, particularly for afternoon sessions. So morning sessions are easier because you just go and have brekkie. Afternoon sessions, it can be like, how long until dinner? Do I need a snack beforehand? How far away am I traveling to get home, for example? So sometimes you might need a top-up snack. So it might be, a flavored milk or a yogurt or a high-protein muesli bar to get you to dinner. Other times you might feel that you can go straight into dinner. And you can see there's a range of meals when you add fluid that meet the 4 R's there, and they change in terms of simplicity and time. So there's a homemade dinner, then there's like a toasted sandwich, a wrap, an omelette with some toast and veg, baked beans on toast, a pre-prepared heat-up meal, a frozen meal. I am not opposed for breakfast for dinner as well. You can easily meet the 4 R's that way as well. So it's actually, you can really simplify it when you just break it down into the individual components that you need. A lot of the time they're already there in an evening meal, or most of the meals that you do eat as well. One of the things that I love to focus on is really how we then put all of those things into practice. Whilst what I do and performance nutrition is a science, eating is a behavior and everyone eats. So we need to simplify things and build habits around them to actually make long-term change that's going to benefit our health, well-being, and performance. So it's quite complex in terms of there's all these things underneath the tip of the iceberg, which is the food that you eat, that influence the food that you eat. So budget and finances, knowledge, mood, mental health, culture, diet pressure, if you have food guilt or shame, or potentially body image concerns or other things like that, self-isolation, or who you live with and how they eat, what that living arrangement and cooking arrangement is like. Your skills, or the skills of those preparing food for you, can all be a big influencer as well. So these are things that we all need to consider when we're looking at, okay, well, where's practical for me to start? How do I actually look at putting some of these things into place? It's not prescriptive. It's not here, go do that. It's, okay, well, what's impacting and where can I actually make change? So I think it's really important to then focus on as well empowering your body and mind. So food can be fun and all foods have a place. And it's really important to know what works for you or your child does not work for the person next to you. Everyone has different requirements and different things influencing what they need to choose. And you can share your own views without imposing them on others as well. So play your part, know your role. So it's great being in a team sport. If you're concerned for another team member's health, your role is to check in with them. Are they okay? Do they need anything? Can you help them tell someone? Speak to a coach or, a dietitian, and then just go back to being a friend or a teammate or a parent or whatever it may be. So some of those things might be just noticing, maybe they are getting sick a lot or getting injured a lot, or, they're, more moody than they may normally be, or they don't really seem like their heart's in it. Or, they might be quite fixated on their body and their appearance, or, you notice that they're, maybe being a bit restrictive in what foods or their views around food. It's just checking in with them and then seeing, if they do need some help or support, and then just, going back to being, their teammate. And that's the really good thing about being in a team sport rather than individually. So the food environment really matters, and it's something that collectively everyone can play a role in improving. So it's recognizing the role of food and eating for enjoyment and pleasure in addition to the role in performance. And so ensuring you or, the team is offered opportunities to consume food in social settings, around sport or after, before sessions. If it's a longer session, having some breaks where, fluid or a bit of carbs is encouraged, but then also looking at school, work and home and how that shows up as well. And ensuring that there's relaxed environments. Often, we're rushing from school, work, study to training and then home, and then it's homework or, family things or whatever, and it's kind of bang, 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 rush, rush, rush. So it's trying to give space where there can be space to have that relaxed environment with enough time to eat and to give enjoyment into that food. And starting to learn and build confidence around grocery shopping, cooking, and budgeting around food as well is really important to start helping protect that food environment as well. Then early identification is some of the other things that we can really practically put into place in terms of staying out of that low energy availability, which can also be referred to as relative energy deficiency, or REDS. So in you or someone else. So it's trusting the instincts for yourself. And if you feel a bit off, that's a good flag. You know yourself best. So pay attention to that. Talking to a parent or a trusted adult or, someone around what you're noticing, and brainstorm, if you do notice these things, what might you do? So it might be making an appointment to see the GP, a sports physician or a sports dietitian. Taking an inventory of how much you're eating and how much you're doing, and do you feel like there's any changes that are easy to make or that could be improved upon? Or reflecting like, oh, am I actually doing more, but I'm still eating the same? Okay, maybe I do need to eat a little bit more. Testing out making small but accessible changes, and that could look like adding extra snacks or, I'm a big fan of using drinks. So milk drinks, juice, those type of things when your appetite's lower, to just increase your energy without the need for a huge amount of food that can feel really overwhelming, particularly for females where, you know, it is that environment around being, we tend to be cautious around our portions compared to others and those type of things. So liquids can feel potentially a lot more doable to a lot of female athletes as well. And then a really big thing for everyone to focus on is maintaining a positive relationship with food. So our relationship with food actually sits on a spectrum, and that's from optimized nutrition all the way to an eating disorder, and disordered eating is something that falls in between. So things can happen in our life that can make us transition up and down along that spectrum. Times where our life is changing a lot, growth, youth, and those big transition life stages, as well as, you know, things that might happen in sport or outside of that are those big places that are more likely to cause those shifts. So what does that healthy, positive relationship with food look like? It's being really confident that food serves many purposes outside of performance and fuel. So it's understanding that, you know, food has a place for social connection, for joy, for nostalgia, for family connection, for cultural connection. There's a lot of other aspects that aren't just performance and fuel. And food has no morality. It's just food. It can't be good. It can't be bad. It's not a person. It doesn't have morals. So stopping labeling food as good or bad or healthy and unhealthy can be really helpful, because it just puts it on an even playing field and just makes all food equal and gives permission for all food to have a right to be eaten. And that can sound really scary for some people. They go, oh, if I just give myself permission to have chocolate, I'll just have it at every meal. You won't. What you'll actually do is get rid of guilt or shame when you do eat the chocolate. And that's what we're trying to achieve. You don't need to earn the right to eat food. So if you find yourself that you're like, oh, I can only eat that food when I train, or it's okay to eat this because I did a bigger session today, then that means you're focusing on attaching the foods that you feel the right to eat based on how much exercise you've done. You're a person, you're alive. That's all the right to eat that you need. You don't have to earn any extra right or permission to eat that food. And then practicing self-compassion and acceptance around that. So if this has brought up some things that you notice in yourself or someone else, it's just starting to just do that, notice with kindness. Oh, okay, that thought's coming up. Interesting. I wonder why that's showing up in me. Yeah. And then you can start to work with someone around how you might challenge that to move to a positive relationship with food. But just noticing can be, and be self-aware, can be really helpful. So when we look at what an ideal positive relationship with food looks like, it should be an eating pattern that's regular, adequate, includes variety, includes social eating occasions, and is really flexible in what foods are eaten, and you know, moving to an intuitive place with food as well. So if it's cutting out food groups, if it's, you know, feeling quite anxious around eating socially, or, you know, if someone just last minute invites you out for a meal, that feeling that you know, can't do that, or if it's tracking everything that you eat and logging that, or trying to hit macros and things like that, that's actually not a positive relationship with food, and you don't need that to be a successful athlete that performs well. So that in a nutshell is a bit of a quick overview of some performance nutrition with a sprinkle of just positive relationship with food energy availability as well. So if anyone has any questions, yeah, feel free to throw them out.
I think we've got a couple in the chat from Joe.
Oh, yes, I just saw that. So I think the most valuable thing I actually learned during my time at the AIS was the permission that performance nutrition actually doesn't have to be, just focused on what you're eating and how much and macros and tracking and body comp. It's actually a large piece of it was permission to focus on body image and how an athlete's relationship with food is and what that environment is and how you can really take a proactive approach to nurture their relationship with food and look after their well-being. So once I kind of got that permission to be that performance dietitian, that really changed for me. So that was probably the biggest piece, was that it was okay to work like that, and that's actually very helpful for the athletes as well. And one piece of advice I want all young athletes to understand, I think it's that importance of all food has a place. Yeah, performance nutrition isn't clean eating. It's lollies at games. It's a range of foods. It's still being able to eat out socially. It's not what a lot of people view nutrition for health and performance to be. And, I think it's not restrictive. Would be, a really big flag to be aware of. They're really great questions.
Do we have any other questions from the floor? You're welcome to put it in the chat or unmute yourself for a moment there as well. No, that's okay. I want to say a very big thank you to Demi. That was really, really insightful. I think the touching on the refueling as everyone kind of focuses on the pre-training and pre-game nutritional load, I think refueling is so important as well. And thank you also to Sara and Georgia for tonight. For joining this session. I'll be uploading it to the website as well for everyone to revisit if they'd like, or also spread the word to your teammates, players, and around your club if they want to jump on and find little snippets of information there. That would be amazing.